Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
I think, honestly, if you ask most Americans, more Americans would rather fly with snakes on the plane than Middle Eastern people at this point.
Coming up, I talk with Palestinian-American comic Dean Obeidallah about how he uses humor to diffuse tensions around ethnicity and religion in America. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. America's demographics are changing. In the next 40 years, most of the population growth in our country will come from minorities. Indeed, researchers predict that the minorities of today will represent the majority of people in the United States by 2050. With the impending changes has come some fear and in some cases a backlash. One group that's experienced a negative reaction are Muslims. At the same time there's been conflict, though, there's also been a rise in the popularity of Muslim comedians. One of those comics is Dean Obeidallah. The son of a Palestinian-American father and an Italian-American mother, Obeidallah started his career as a lawyer. He'd always enjoyed comedy, though, and was a researcher for Saturday Night Live. Eventually, Obeidallah developed his own routines. He's been successful. Among other things, he starred in Comedy Central's The Axis of Evil special. He was also featured in a PBS documentary called Stand Up, Muslim American Comics Come of Age. And Obeidallah co-produced a documentary called The Muslims Are Coming, about his cross-country tour with other Muslim American comics. At the core of his humor, though, is a serious thread of concern that Muslim Americans are being targeted for their religion. I talked with Obeidallah in October of 2015. He was in Boise to deliver the keynote address at a Boise State University conference about the Arab world in Idaho, a conference that included a food festival. Well, welcome to Idaho. It's great to have you here.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. It's a beautiful state.
Did you ever think you'd be at an Arab food festival in Boise, Idaho?
It's a dream come true. I always hoped as a child that would come happen, and now it's off the bucket list. I really feel fulfilled now.
Well, it's happening in part because the state is becoming more diverse, all different ethnicities. At the same time, there's tension surrounding that. Mm-hmm. So we have some who fear that growing, or what they see as an influx.
Right. I mean, you're going to see, I think people, if anything comes into their neighborhood or community that's different, regardless if they're Muslim, Arab, Latino, different colors, different background, I think certain people get a little visceral reaction. They're concerned. You just hope in time that if you have conversations with them, introduce them to the people coming to the community, whoever they might be, it lessens their concerns. I really believe that dialogue is like the greatest way to find common ground, but I'm also—
You're just saying that because that's the name of my show.
That's part of it, exactly. I'm ripping off this show's name from now on. But I also am old enough to understand there are certain people you'll never reach. There was a time when I was young, I'm like, you can reach anyone. No, I know you can't. There's certain people you can't reach. So you reach as many people as you can. You hope you can build a critical mass of people who are tolerant and supportive of other communities, whatever they might be, and accepting.
Well, food helps.
Food is the greatest thing. It brings people together. You enjoy the food. I think entertainment helps a great deal. If it's comedy, if it's music, those things take people outside of the political mindset, and it's just human. It's like, oh, I like this food. And then you have a conversation over, like, say, a falafel or something like that, and perhaps it brings people together, or Arab comedy show, or Arab music, or even belly dancing, whatever they might choose as the vehicle. I believe non-traditional ways to reach people might be more effective than a speech or a lecture.
Tell folks a little bit about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You grew up, your father's Palestinian-American, your mother is not.
Right. My dad was Palestinian-American. He's actually Palestinian. He was born in what was then Palestine and came here and then became a U.S. citizen. My mom was born here. She's Sicilian. She's Christian. He's Palestinian and Muslim. So I grew up in a very, multicultural home, multi-religious home, multi-ethnic home. It really was two different worlds coming together in one home in Bergen County, New Jersey, northern Jersey. But on some level, it was a microcosm of what America is. It was a melting pot in my house, and it came to life every day. It was interesting to see the different cultures, different foods, arguments over different things.
So did you take communion?
I did when I was young. I went to Catholic school when I was younger. Because when I grew up, there was no one really Muslim. My dad was the only Muslim in the area. I mean, really, no exaggeration. I brought him to school for show and tell. I'm not even kidding. Like in 3rd grade, my teacher was like, wow, an Arab man. And I brought him in. And today, I wonder if you brought an Arab or Muslim man into schools. I bet you there's some parents who would say, are you trying to indoctrinate our children or trying to brainwash them? I mean, that's how much things have evolved so much. I think too often the media gravitates to the more extreme voices who don't always represent more than a teeny fringe part of our society. And that defines people's views of a community. And it's not fair. Because I found out what the Muslims are coming. We went down to places where there was some history of intolerance towards Muslims. We met so many people who were like, don't let those real extremists represent our community. We were open and loving. The media just happened to gravitate towards the loudest voices. That's what the media does. So it's part of the challenge.
And we'll talk about The Muslims Are Coming in just a moment, your show that you took on the road and then turned into a documentary and even visited Idaho and Salt Lake. So when you were growing up, did you consider yourself Muslim?
I consider myself more Christian, I would say, just because it was everything around us. We grew up in a community that really was all Christian. But Islam was always a part of my life since I was a child. And both religions were there from day one, as much as I can understand. You know, my name is Deen, it means faith in Arabic, also in Farsi. And my father wanted a much more traditional Arabic name. He wanted like Salahuddin. And Salahuddin Obaidallah would have been a challenging name in America. My mom, who's Italian, wanted Dino, so the compromise name was Deen, but my dad was very happy because it meant faith. And Obaidallah means servant of Allah, my last name. So as soon as I could write my name, I understood that Islam and faith was a big part of my life. It was never any kind of contest growing up. She said both faiths, we celebrated everything together. No one made us choose. Only later in life that people were much more demanding. Like, what religion are you? I'm like, do I have to pick for you? You know, your faith is between you and God anyway. It's not between me and other people who want to define me a certain way.
So how did September 11th change that?
September 11th changed my life, not just about my outlook on faith, but on my outlook as a person, on who I am. Pre 9/11, I really was a white guy. I mean, identified as a white guy. I was a lawyer. I worked in a law firm. I viewed myself as part of the white majority. I didn't view myself as Arab American or probably a little bit more Italian, to be honest, because I grew up in an all-Italian community. And I tell people on September 10th, I went to sleep a white guy. September 11th, I woke up an Arab. My world had changed because everyone changed around me. I really didn't change. I was no different than September 10th than I was on September 11th. But the way people perceived Arabs and Muslims had changed so dramatically in that short period of time and for the weeks and months later that I started to get a sense that my own heritage and faith were completely misunderstood by people. And I just try to use my skill set in communicating and my law degree to try to foster understanding, bring people together, answer their questions.
Are you depressed because no one wants to fly in the same plane as you? Are you anxious because you resemble several people on the government's most wanted list? Are you angry because every time you go to the airport, you're randomly selected for extra screening? And you need Arabigan.
Didn't you even change your name for a short period of time from Obaidallah?
I did, because I was doing comedy. Even though I was a lawyer, I was doing stand-up comedy, and I was using my real name, Obaidallah. And there was a booker at a comedy club in New York City who was a friend of mine and said, I don't think you should use Obaidallah on stage. I mean, first he said, I don't think you should talk about being Arab at all. And I did like a couple of jokes at most about being Arab. It was not a big part of my act, because it was not a big part of my own self-identification as a person. And he said, for your own safety, because if you say Obaidallah and someone hears Allah and they say, like, well, what's that about? And this is New York City, a couple weeks after 9/11. So, and I knew he was trying to be helpful. So I used Dean Joseph instead. I used like my middle name to be more generic. And I did it for a few weeks, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense at all. Because first of all, I look like a white guy, so no one was guessing what my background was. But I'm like, I really felt like I was hiding from something. So I just went back to Dean Obaidallah. No one on stage ever asked what kind of name was that. In real life, people started asking what it was after 9/11, but on stage it wasn't being brought up.
So what was the shift in you to, I think you started to learn Arabic and to wanting to be more open about that part of your heritage and even use it in your routines?
Well, I think it really ignited a sense of activism in myself. I mean, I already was active in politics a little bit before, but by the time of 9/11, I was not as active as I had been a few years before in different local issues in my community where I grew up in North Jersey. I just thought, well, here's an opportunity to speak to people, and I'm born in America, I have no accent, I can connect with people, I can use humor. So I just started to explain about who we were, but I realized I needed to know more about Arabs and Muslims and Islam to explain it to people. How can I answer questions if I didn't know more than they did? So, and obviously I knew more because I grew up with an Arab father and Islam was part of my life, but I just made a conscious decision to learn more, to read more, to join Arab American organizations. I never belonged to any of them before 9/11. I belonged to numerous ones now, and after 9/11, about a year afterwards, started joining them, taking Arabic lessons. A few years after 9/11, I went to the Middle East for the first time ever. I did not want to go before 9/11. My father went back once. I'm like, I don't want to go there. It looks scary. So my life completely changed from typical white guy living in New York City at the time who wanted to make partner in a law firm, and my dreams were getting a better golf score, to trying to use my skills to be an activist.
What does your mom think?
Well, she thought it was fine. I mean, she still reminds me that, oh, you remember you're still Italian. I go, I know I'm Italian. I'm very proud of my heritage. I have no problem being Italian and Arab. And I always tell people, if Italians needed the help, I would be there. If Catholics were being demonized, and my mom's Catholic, and I was raised both Catholic and Muslim, if Catholics were being demonized, I can assure you I would be speaking out against bigotry. And now, all these years later, I speak out against bigotry against any community. I write for the Daily Beast. I've written so many articles about African American community and racism directed at them, against the LGBT community, about Latinos being demonized in different political campaigns. So now, as a minority and as somebody of color, I feel a connection to all different minority groups a great deal. So I speak out all the time on all minority issues.
Now, your father is not alive.
Right.
He died, I think, in 1998.
98, exactly.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So he did not live to see September 11th.
Right.
His thoughts, though, I assume from hearing you speak, he would have just been appalled and shocked anyway that this was done in the name of Islam.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, before 9/11, there were some minor terrorist attacks here and there that we would see in the media perpetrated by Muslims. My father would explain this has nothing to do with our faith. Islam is not about killing innocent people. It's the opposite. And so he was always upset by that. I can only imagine how outraged he would have been by 9/11. Like so many Muslims in our community, just upset that other people would take the name of our faith, use it for their political agenda. And that's frankly what it's about. And, we get in discussions all the time. Is it religion? Is it not? Look, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are literally killing each other on the battlefields of Syria. If they were both about some true form of Islam, they would be united. They're not. They have a political agenda. Both groups are politically motivated. And they use Islam, they'll use faith to rally people. Religion is a great rallying tool. We've seen it through the years, used not just by Muslims, other faiths too. It brings people to feel like they have a connection to it.
Well, I assume you also understand the fear, though, that people have when they do look at groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda who are doing things in the name of Islam, and a fear of that coming here and affecting their lives.
Muslims have fears of ISIS. ISIS by far are killing Muslims more than anyone, and Al-Qaeda as well. It's been documented over 90 to 95% of the victims of those two terror groups are Muslims, because it makes sense. They're waging most of their war in the Muslim world. They're slaughtering people in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Syria now, in big numbers in Iraq. Muslims are being killed by ISIS. We're all afraid of ISIS. We all hate ISIS. It's not Islam versus the West. It's all of us together against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I think it's really a bigger understanding of what Islam's about, so people would understand that ISIS is the exception, that I'm not the exception. Like the good Muslims, we're not the exception. We're the normal Muslims. We're like, when I see a Christian blow up an abortion clinic, I don't think that's Christianity. I understand that's the exception. Eric Rudolph, people like that. I know he's the exception. He doesn't represent Christianity. The same way ISIS doesn't represent Islam. But there's a drumbeat in our media of people saying that it is. Yet I've had numerous imams on my radio show, numerous clerics of all different backgrounds, from conservative to much more progressive, including the openly gay imam, the only one in America, who's a scholar in Islam, and he's gay, talking about that there's not a support for what ISIS is doing in the Quran in understanding how it's supposed to be interpreted.
Let's talk about humor and the role it plays, because that's where you come onto stage, so to speak. I mean, you left your law profession. You already had been working for Saturday Night Live, writing, and then you struck out, and you've been quite successful in these venues. You have a show called The Muslims Are Coming. I encourage people to watch it. It's on Netflix. It's quite humorous, maybe PG rated a little bit.
That's some cursing.
Some language in there.
Like
no nudity. But what prompted this design? It's a group of comics, all of whom are Muslim in various gradations of that, if we can say that, some more observant than others. And you went on the road to places like Georgia, Florida, Idaho Falls, Idaho, which didn't make the cut, unfortunately, for the documentary, Salt Lake. What prompted the desire to go out on the road?
Well, I did that with my friend Negin Farsad, and she's Iranian American and Muslim, and we have worked on other projects before, and we felt like there was a need to do something. This was 2010 when we came up with it. They didn't need to do something to start countering the anti-Muslim bigotry out there, and we knew that, you know, the well-intentioned Muslim American groups are great, but press conferences are not reaching people. They're not changing people's minds. So we percolated different ideas, and this came up. So we went out and shot in like 2011-ish, maybe early 2012, the interviews, and we did all free comedy shows because we thought, let's go out and meet people. We're comedians, let's use comedy. It's really disarming comedy. People come in, they laugh, it's a free comedy show. We had a Q&A after every show. We did a lot of street action, like we set up a table, asking Muslim a question on the streets, and really try to talk to people about their concerns about Muslims.
Well, let's listen to a clip, in fact, of this idea of Ask a Muslim.
Our idea for Lawrenceville, Georgia was to set up an Ask a Muslim booth right in the town center.
Look at this clearly anti-Muslim rhetoric going on in this town. Bacon, 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 bacon.
Hopefully people are going to have some questions from a Muslim. Questions like, are you allowed to wear that outfit?
Come ask a Muslim a question. Today is the day. A live Muslim is here to answer your questions. Again, anything? In your shrill voice, you want to add something? People of Gwinnett County, we are here to answer your questions.
I'm good, thank you. No? You have any questions?
Do you have any questions about Islam? Not to join, just about us. We're not trying to get you to join.
Well, you're dressed like an American.
Yeah. I am an American.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm American Iranian.
You know, there's only one kind of American, and that's American. My ancestors are from Holland, but I don't claim to be a Dutch American.
Right.
I'm an American American.
Right.
To me, if you want to be a part of this country, you just got to be a part of it.
Tell me why I haven't seen Muslims who are not extremists criticizing the Muslims who are being extreme.
Why are not the people of peace speaking out against the people that are doing these things?
I kind of resent sometimes when people are like, Muslims need to prove to us that they are not dangerous. Why? Why do I have to prove to you that I'm not dangerous? Historically, you're the dangerous one. I'm actually should be more afraid of you.
That brown guy is Asif Manvi from The Daily Show. He's Daily Show correspondent.
Very familiar to some people, I'm sure. Right. Well, there's a lot even in that little clip right there. Let's talk first about you need to be an American American.
Well, we heard that more than once on the road. There are Americans, and we've heard politicians say it as well, say things like, you shouldn't be a hyphenated American, you used to be an American. I think it's your choice, what you want to be. It doesn't mean you're any less American because you're proud of your ethnic heritage. This country is a beautiful melting pot. It continues to be. I'm very proud of being Italian and proud of being Arab. I'm most proud of being American. My dad came to this country, my grandparents came to this country, they picked this country. And I'm so happy they picked this country for the opportunity and freedoms that we have here that I would not have had even in Sicily if I grew up where my mom's from, and certainly not in the West Bank where my father's from, living under occupation. So I think there's some people that misperceive what that really means.
Let's talk about the other part of that where people are, and I've heard this from a lot of people, why don't more moderate Muslims speak up?
Well, the reality is, I think for years, the community would just do press releases and things and think that would be enough. And then a few years ago, many in the Muslim American community realized more had to be done. And going out and talking to people. But part of the struggle, frankly, is getting in the media. I've had this exact conversation with producers at different television networks going, you'll have 10 hours of scary Muslims, and at most we'll get on for 3 minutes to say, hey, we're not about that. We don't control what gets on television. We're not the gatekeepers. If we did, you would see more Muslims being, first of all, condemning terrorism would be part of it, but then telling the story about what we really are about. Because it's one thing to say, I'm not this, but I think if we affirmatively define ourselves, then people understand immediately what we're really about.
Well, the comedy field is starting to burgeon, I think. I mean, you've been programming a comedy festival, an Arab American comedy festival for a dozen years or so now. You're performing your routines abroad now in the Middle East. So it's almost like we're at a tipping point. Do you think we'll see a popular show with, say, an Arab American Family on it, or a talk show, the way we've seen with other cultures that'll popularize it?
That's the dream. I mean, God willing, as you know, Arabs and Muslims will say, there's a lot of people moving up the ladder. I think in time we will. I've pitched certainly in numerous TV shows to different networks that were starring Arabs or starring Muslim families. I think they're not sure if that'll work because it has to be broad enough for everyone to get it, and that's part of the issue. But I think they're coming up now. You have Asif Manvi, who just saw us on a new HBO show last season. It started, a funny show, and you have more people now. There's a new Brown correspondent, Hassan Minhaj, on The Daily Show. I think it's getting
there.
New
Brown correspondent?
He's the new. Asif is sort of not doing as much full time, but Hassan Minhaj is the new. He's Muslim and he's brown. He's a new guy who's sort of replacing Asif, and he's on it. So I think what's happening though is executives are thinking in their mind, well, we have different people of color. Well, we should have a box that's for the Muslim or the Arab person because it makes sense because they're part of the fabric of the nation now.
You've joked you don't get your own holiday.
Well, yeah, we get Orange Alert in the old days. Yeah, when we used to have the Orange Alert system that the Bush administration gave us that to bring awareness to us. I think comedy is such a great way to deal even with those kind of issues because it's almost cathartic and it's a release. It's something that all minority groups have done in America. African Americans, Jewish Americans did it great in the 30s and 40s. We're just inserting our voice into a wheel that's been created by others before.
Well, there has been kind of a reputation of it being a little bit more staid or not as humorous of a faith, you know, and I think that's
true.
Changing as more comics come up.
True, and I think if people would realize too, in the Middle East, there's now a lot of comedy going on. The last few years, stand-up comedy. There were always films, comedic films. They were in Arabic. We're not going to watch them. You know, we're not going to see them here.
One of the things I liked about your documentary, The Muslims Are Coming, is that you showed another comic who is more traditional, I guess, observant. Is that what you might say? And he's saying, you know, I don't think some of these comics, maybe even meaning you, are true Muslims. And then you also showed some women in hijab walking out of a show. So there's a challenge even among the Muslim community about acceptance of your type of comedy or any comedy.
There is, and I think that it shouldn't be surprising to people in our community in a way. We're a growing community, and we're still only about 3 or 4 million. But within the Christian and Jewish community, there are people that are really very, very progressive and really conservative. There are Christian sects that don't like dancing. I mean, you're always going to have within your community, when you deal with religion, certain people speaking out and saying, this doesn't represent the faith, this represents the faith, and trying to define it. It's got to be an embracive melting pot, even within the faiths, I think.
One of the shticks, if for want of a better word, that you had was hug a Muslim.
Yes.
And you did that at Salt Lake City. And since we are not too far away from that community, it was very interesting to me to talk about what happened.
Right.
You were well received. There was a line to hug you.
We had done that in a few other cities. We didn't have that kind of response. The people in Salt Lake, and we did it outside of the big Mormon temple, the LDS temple, were great. They came over, they hugged us. We had so many great conversations in Salt Lake. We went to, there was a street fair out there. We talked to a lot of people in the LDS community who felt like their faith had been demonized a great deal by people who don't know them, by some extreme right Christian, I put that in quotes, ministers saying horrible things like they're a cult and they're not real Christian, that kind of stuff. So this kind of camaraderie. They were so embracive and so warm, the LDS community. It was an amazing thing. So that's why we sort of ended the movie with going there and meeting them. It was very inspiring because I didn't know much about LDS people and Mormons, to be honest. We didn't know what to expect, and what an amazing experience.
What did you learn as a person, as an Arab American, from doing this tour across the country with The Muslims Are Coming?
I think that, you know, America's a beautifully diverse country. We're going to have people who are very embracing of us in the reddest of the red states, but you're also going to have people who have questions about you and some who just don't like you and don't want to have that conversation. Because we had people who would walk by, they look kind of angry, they didn't want to talk to us. Those are the ones I really wanted to talk to. But overwhelmingly, I found, you know, Americans are open-minded and tolerant. There's still pockets of concern, and I think the only way to break through that is to really have judgment-free conversation with people, like, what are your real concerns? Let's talk about it. You can't just tell people, stop talking about it, how dare you, or you're a bigot for raising those issues. That doesn't help anybody. So my point, my radio show with the movie, has always been, let's have open, honest conversations, and hopefully we can find common ground and have dialogue, you know.
What is happening in this country right now with rhetoric against Muslims? How serious do you think it is?
I think it's more alarming today than when we made our movie, to be honest. I think we need a sequel to this movie because the movie really came out like about 2 years ago on platforms that everyone could see nationally. We saw in the 2016 presidential election comments about Muslims by certain candidates that were very alarming. Even before that, comments by an Oklahoma state representative saying Muslim Americans are a cancer that should be cut out of this country. And he didn't even apologize. There was no backlash to that. So we're concerned because the words of politicians in American history do legitimize people's feelings of hate and actually have animated people to commit horrible acts of violence. We saw that during the Civil Rights Act. It's well documented, 1960s attack on churches. We've seen attacks on mosques in the last few months, a spike in that, graffiti, hate crimes, physical attacks on certain Muslims, discrimination claims by more Muslims now than ever about being fired from their workplace. I'm concerned. I'm still optimistic, but I am concerned. But I'm really happy there's more interfaith alliances now than ever. Muslim leaders have gone out and working with Christian and Jewish leaders in different parts of the country, standing together, shoulder to shoulder. And that's so important. That's the way I think we're going to move forward as a community.
50 years from now, what do you think?
I think we're going to look back at the same way we looked at anti-Semitism in the 1930s and 40s, which was really rampant at that time, and politicians did use it. And you look back with a sense of like bewilderment, like how could you have done that? How could you be that hateful? And almost shame that other people didn't stand up against it. I mean, there's a great quote by Martin Luther King, I'll just paraphrase, who said, it's not the strident clamor of the bad people that are as upsetting, it's the quietness and the silence of the good people that's appalling. And so we need good people to speak out. And this whole lesson has taught me since 9/11 to speak out for not just my own community, but for any community that's being attacked and demonized. Because I know that today it might be me, tomorrow it's someone else. And it's not right because they've shifted from me and targeted someone else. It's just as wrong.
What's next for you? You've jokingly run for vice president before, but in a serious vein, would you consider running for office? Or?
I run for president just to piss off some people on the right who think there should be a Muslim president, perhaps. I like politics. I'm not sure where I can be most effective. If I thought I could be most effective being an elected official at some point, I would consider it. But I think I can be almost more effective and reach more people through the media. But I think there's a place for it. I think there are more Muslims. There's 2 Muslim members of Congress now, Keith Ellison, Andre Carson. There'll be more in the future. It's important to be on the inside and the outside. I just hope that I can, make a difference on the issues, get out there and meet people, make them laugh, make them think.
Well, thank you. Thanks for taking time
Thanks for having me.
Talk to us and come back again.
Sure. I love it. It's beautiful. Idaho's beautiful. I tell people it's really beautiful. I've been tweeting about it.
You've been listening to Arab-American comic Dean Obeidallah, who visited Boise in October of 2015. For more information about Obeidallah, including the PBS documentary in which he's featured, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.